All right. Thank you guys for joining us this afternoon. It is definitely a timely conversation. I'm Sarah Milby. I'm joined on stage by Cody, Matt, Christy, and Eric. Thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon. I thought it might be helpful to get a quick landscape of where we are in the regulatory space and what some of the challenges that builders and other companies are facing. So, Christy, as a lawyer who has to navigate this every day and give advice to others, how are you thinking about the current landscape of the space?
Well, I mean, I'm approaching it mostly from the securities exchange perspective. I work at a law firm in securities enforcement. I worked at the SEC as the chief of the crypto asset and cyber unit under Jay Clayton and then under Gary Gensler, and left about 2 years ago. What I'm seeing in my practice is enforcement. And largely focused on right now on intermediaries. Historically, the SEC has also brought a lot of cases against issuers, but we're seeing almost exclusively intermediary actions in this space right now. And these are for by and large, they're non-fraud regulatory violations or rule violations, and that's also not, I think, exclusive to the crypto asset industry. For those TradFi folks in the room, you're seeing all the record keeping cases out of the SEC. Those are rule violations. You don't have investor harm, you don't have fraud. We're seeing a lot of whistleblower protection actions that don't actually have allegations that a whistleblower was retaliated against. Things there's this kind of broad mandate, I think, across the SEC that is highly regulatory infractions, rule violations that are non-fraud, no investor harm. So my hope for the new administration is that we shift back to detecting and remediating fraud and putting money back in pockets of investors who have been harmed.
And Matt and Eric, you guys are both working at companies in this space, and I'm sure you have had your fair share of challenges trying to navigate the regulatory landscape. Matt, maybe I'll start with you in terms of what you think some of the most operationally challenging things you faced as you're trying to navigate what's going on in Congress and what's going on with the different regulators, whether that be the SEC or CFTC, and how is that impacting how you're thinking about your business?
Yeah, first off, for those that were here hoping to see Peter Smith, I'm not Peter. I was airdropped in about an hour ago. He had plane trouble and wasn't able to make it. So on behalf of blockchain.com, thanks for having us. We do have a number of challenges that we face regulatory-wise. We have licensed entities across the world, Singapore, all across the EU, here in the States, and keeping up on all of those licenses and the changes that go on in those jurisdictions are incredibly challenging. We have a huge team of compliance, legal, regulatory folks that keep us up to speed on everything. But it remains a huge challenge for us.
How about you, Eric?
Yeah, I would certainly echo what was said here, that compliance is paramount in our industry. As we develop from this fringe asset class to a real asset class, we have to be super compliant, and so we are, and that's where what regulation, what districts can you operate in, what clients can you face, and making sure that you're not crossing those boundaries. Where do I need to get licensed? Where do I not need to get licensed? And those rules keep changing, and they keep evolving. And clearly, with the new administration, they'll continue to evolve in the U.S. But it is a global asset class, so obviously, compliance both in the assets that are coming in and out and moving through, and kind of AML compliance with wallets and screens like that. You're also dealing with jurisdictional issues that are very, very, very paramount.
And Cody, you are based in DC and think about politics a lot of the time. I'm curious, after last night and what we've kind of learned about the outcome of this election, what do you think the industry should be doing in order to shape the dialogue of policymaking going into next Congress? And what do you think the industry can put forward? Like, how can it put its best foot forward with this incoming class?
Well, after last night, I think the industry has successfully overcome one of the biggest hurdles, and that was just relevancy and the fight for existence in Washington. It is no longer, acceptable for a policymaker to say that this industry is just a trend or a fad, or the companies in this space will, just go away, or this is a bubble. So that's great, but now it's time to actually get some policy done. And the way to do that is through education. Yes, it's great. We had an incredible night last night in terms of pro-crypto candidates making their way now to Washington and winning their races. But that education gap in DC and talking to these policymakers every day, even some of the ones who are the most supportive of this industry, is still large. And so what the industry needs to do going forward as we're continuing to shape the dialogue and continuing to be active in the conversations in Washington, because while we had a successful night, a lot is still left to be done. We have to start talking about use cases. We have to make this technology relatable for policymakers. Right now, if you go in and you start talking about the tech and how a blockchain works, or how a transfer of assets works peer to peer, how a layer one or custodian works, any of that, it goes right over a policymaker's head. So what can we do to make this understandable, digestible? How can we frame this technology? And I think it's being done by creating more consumer-facing applications, creating more applications where a policymaker can sit there and be like, oh, wow, I'm using blockchain or I'm using digital assets. And that's easy for me. I get this now. That's what the industry is going to have to do going forward to continue to stay relatable and to continue to keep winning in this space.
And Christy, as someone that worked in government, I'm curious how you think about education as well, and especially as you try to navigate compliance and innovation with a lot of your clients, how are you thinking about your messaging and your educational efforts as well?
Well, I mean, at least from the kind of legislative perspective, I think a lot of the groundwork has been done, right? I mean, we've already seen pretty bipartisan and broad support and recognition for the idea that there needs to be an appropriate regulatory regime that consists of more than just enforcement. So I think that the groundwork is laid, but you're right. I think in the U.S. in particular, we are always so focused on passing legislation and regulation that is perfect that we want to make sure we have not just a good kind of groundwork for education, but all of the education. And so there is still a lot of work to be done to get everyone comfortable that the solutions that are being proposed are the right solutions, or that they are going to be imposed in a way that is flexible enough to continue to adapt with the industry. So I think education for Congress, certainly so important. Education for these agencies, really important. I think many of these agencies are made up largely of career public servants. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I was with the SEC for 12 years. These are people who have devoted their lives to public service, and they haven't experienced this side of the business. And, when I came out into private practice 2 years ago, it was a big learning experience for me. And so taking the real world experiences that we all have and approaching Congress, regulatory agencies in a constructive manner, I think it's essential.
And Eric, as someone that interacts with traditional finance a lot, do you think that there's an educational barrier as well to helping bridge broader adoption, or what are you thinking of the biggest obstacles to increase adoption?
Yeah, I would certainly say there is still a negative stigma attached to TradFi people who look at crypto, whether they see the meme coins and think that's blockchain and that's interesting, and I'm sure it is for most people's personal accounts. But from an institutional perspective, people have to see, hey, Bitcoin is a good asset to trade on a macro basis. There are correlation statistics that make it valuable. You should be doing it. Not only can you trade it in futures form, you can trade it in spot form. And that's a global 24/7 asset. So when you talk about managing risk, when weekends, nothing's trading on a weekend, what is? Bitcoin is. And so when institutional asset managers start to think about how they can manage their books globally, they have to start thinking about digital assets. And it really does come from education. People they just don't understand. And it's getting marketing material in front of them. It's showing them the numbers and showing them that they can do it. I think that one of the biggest hurdles for adoption of the asset class is all of the infrastructure that goes into bringing this asset into your fund, right? And you have fund administrators who need to take care of it. You have net asset value problems and things like that. And so we are overcoming those. But when a fund says, "Hey, I want to be in digital assets," there's a lot of work that goes from "I want to be in this space" to "I'm actually in this space."
Are you seeing that negative stigma, Wayne, of TradFi, of blockchain technology and digital assets?
I think it is waning. I think that there are certainly some interesting opportunities for traditional kind of asset managers, whether it's basis trades or some other things where you start to go down the rabbit hole. And, most of us started our crypto journey maybe with Bitcoin, and then they started going down the curve. Like, that does take place. It just takes a lot longer to get there. Do I think most intelligent people are thinking about meme coins as really where they want to make their money, or at least for their fund? Probably not. So I think that they're looking at, hey, here's an alpha generation that is outside of traditional equities and fixed income. Here's where I can really, get in early on something that is unique, new, and interesting.
And Matt, as someone who has to navigate the licensure space, there are lots of licenses, whether that be international with some of your entities abroad or here navigating the states. Curious how you're thinking about friction of the global market that is crypto and how it interacts with the state framework here in the US, and maybe if you think that the federal pathway would be a great option here in the United States, or have you been able to figure out how to do the state by state basis?
Yeah, back to licenses. So blockchain.com has a retail business where we have a wallet where most people know we have, and we also have an institutional business. On the institutional side, we have an OTC desk that trades spot for our clients. That has a separate license in Singapore. We have an options desk in London that's licensed separately. And then we have individual 50 states, licenses in all 50 states that are licensed for US residents to purchase and to trade crypto. So we're dealing with a ton of licenses for innovation and for coming up with new products. Let's say we want to come up with a lending product. We're not quite sure where to go for this license right now. So that's definitely a challenge. I don't know if that answered your question. But.
No, I think it did. I think the question of where to go is definitely important. And Cody, I'm curious how you're thinking of shaping the dialogue in next Congress, because I know that one of the biggest questions that the industry faces generally is what do you put a token in as a commodity or as a security? And that kind of division that we have in the United States with having two market regulators and that being very separate and distinct from other parts of the world. We only have one. How are you thinking of shaping that discussion?
That's the $1 million question. And I think, Christy, you hit on a really good point. One of the biggest issues in Congress right now is if you look at the legislation that's being proposed, specifically on this issue with drawing jurisdictional lines between the SEC and CFTC, all of these bills are trying to solve all the world's problems in one fell swoop. They are massive bills. If you have read the Fit for the 21st Century Act, the market structure bill that passed the House last May with bipartisan support, it's almost 200 pages. It is a lot more in there than just drawing those jurisdictional lines, trying to understand token designation. What is a security? What is a commodity? I think we need to start advocating for more narrow bills. I think we need to start advocating for a bill on custody, a bill on who is the proper regulator, a bill giving the CFTC possibly spot market for digital commodities, a bill defining what a digital commodity is. We have to start narrow and maybe make this a piecemeal approach, and I think that'll be our approach going into the 119th.
Christy, if you had a magic wand, and I'll ask everyone this question, but if you could wave your wand and make something happen next year, whether that be through the regulatory process at the agencies or through legislation, what's one big hurdle you would like to see addressed?
I think the issue that my clients most frequently bump up against is custody. Right now, investment advisors, they're required to have all client funds and securities at a qualified custodian. And it's virtually impossible with respect to crypto. There are very, very few qualified custodians out there that custody crypto. They don't custody all of the crypto assets. And the qualified custodians that are available don't offer kind of nimble trading options. So they're purely custodial solutions, not execution solutions. And so the moment you take them from the part of the business that offers a trust or custodial solution and put them into some sort of trading space, you're out of compliance with the qualified custody rule of the SEC. So the regulators all together, right? Prudential regulators, SEC, everyone has to kind of take their foot off the neck and let more qualified custodians in so that investment advisors can fulfill their fiduciary obligations, right? If you have a liquid token strategy, your fiduciary obligation is to be able to execute trades in these tokens on behalf of your client. You can't do that and comply with the qualified custodian requirement. So we've got to have opportunities for more qualified custodians for investment advisors, but also just custodial solutions from a banking perspective. We have to find a way to let these entities bank.
How about you, Eric?
First, I'll start with I agree with everything that everybody else is going to say. I would say that, and this more I would have asked of Cody, we have a bifurcated regulatory system here, and do we actually need that? Why are we shoehorning digital assets into either commodity or a security? Why can't they just be digital assets, and for us to have a governing body that regulates them, but with different regulations? Obviously, there are needs and wants for how these assets are moved, how they are stored, how they're created, and what they function as. They don't fit into these boxes that we keep trying to create new legislation for, or shoehorn it into existing legislation. And my pie in the sky hope would be that maybe we get to a governing or a self-regulatory organization that allows us to say, these are digital assets and these are how we are going to treat them.
How about you, Matt?
I think along the lines of what you're saying, I work with a lot of token issuers on a daily, weekly basis. And almost all of them have this really complex org structure where there's a foundation in the Caymans or BVI. There's a tech company in Texas. There's another tech company somewhere in Europe. And we, when we're trying to either list or onboard these projects to either our desks or into our wallet, it's really complex for us to go through the onboarding process. So it would be great to see this whole charade kind of move forward and go away at some point and allow these token issuers to do business here in the U.S. as the token that they are, and not have to go through this crazy process that they're going through right now.
Cody?
I'll just say first, I agree with you. I would love some kind of unilateral governing body for this industry, or an SRO. I think why we haven't advocated strongly for that right now is just listening to folks in Washington that it seems unrealistic at the time being. The SEC and the CFTC are very, very effective in lobbying Congress. They don't want to give up jurisdiction here. And lawmakers are also very hesitant to create some new regulatory body, especially on the Republican side of the aisle, who is advocating for less government. So I think it's a great idea, and I think it's probably needed, and it is needed. I think it's challenging. My wish list is the wish list. It's a good wish list, and it's on mine as well. Mine will be, because I agree with everything, will be stablecoin legislation, U.S. regulatory framework for stablecoin issuance. I think it's low-hanging fruit. U.S. dollar-denominated stablecoins are proliferating right now all across the world. There is a desire for access to the US dollar in jurisdictions that just can't have it, and they're turning to stablecoins. And when we talk about dollar dominance and US economic competitiveness, and you look at some of the other jurisdictions that are trying to compete with the US dollar, and you look at like the BRICS coalition with China and Russia trying to compete with the US dollar, one way to not only compete, but to win that battle and make sure that the US dollar stays the reserve currency of the entire world is through stablecoins. And the way to do that in the U.S. to make sure that U.S. dollar-backed stablecoins can continue to proliferate is by creating a regulatory framework where they can be issued safely and soundly here in the U.S.
What I think is interesting about all these wish list items, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this, is I feel like whether there were a Democrat or a Republican taking office in the White House in January, now we know it's going to be Donald Trump. Would your answer would it have changed, right? Like, I don't know if it's a bipartisan issue, crypto in general and blockchain. Do you think it's bipartisan? Or are you all feeling it's more of a generational divide that tends to divide Congress? Just curious how you all are thinking about that.
I'll take a quick stab and say that obviously, I think as an industry are looking for relief from Operation Choke Point 2.0 or whatever we want to call it. And so if we get any, had we gone the other way in the election, I think that we would continue to be fearful of what's going on, and the stifling of the growth of this industry. And it's not even the stuff you see in the headlines every day. It's really the things that are going on behind the scenes that are really, keeping a chokehold on this industry's growth in the U.S. And so, I do think we are fortunate enough to be in a position where we can make that leap forward. And if we'd gone the other way last night, then we wouldn't be that way.
I agree, and I think the question, it is a bipartisan issue. I don't think, and it should be, right? I don't know why innovation in this space should be particularly partisan, but I think what we've saw kind of in the months leading up to the election, particularly after Vice President Harris announced her candidacy, a shift in the prioritization of this industry. I think that there was all this kind of like sudden recognition from the Democrats that, oh, this is actually a meaningful industry that we need to start paying more attention to and start being less hostile towards. And so I don't necessarily think that even under a Democratic administration, we would continue down the same path we're on now. But I do think under a Republican administration, it's going to be a priority. And there are simple fixes. I'm not sure that the intermediary problem has a simple solution or the legislation problem, but there are a number of areas, custodial solutions, SAB 121, I think would be easy enough to roll back. The dealer rule that sweeps in kind of all of these DeFi participants are stablecoin legislation is another one. There are a lot of smaller, easier lifts that I do think will now become priorities, and because they already have bipartisan support, they're achievable.
Cody, do you agree? I mean, you've been in this space for a long time and working on with Congress people. How do you think it's shifted over time? Like in the last 5 years or so, how would you say things have changed?
I think the technology is bipartisan or nonpartisan. I think you're exactly right. There's no reason for technology or innovation of this kind to be partisan. I think, unfortunately for Democrats, is that the loudest voices in the party were anti-crypto. When you have Elizabeth Warren, who is one of the most popular and loudest mouthpieces of the Democratic Party, coming out saying, running on an anti-crypto army, it's very easy to sit on the sidelines and be like, all right, well, Democrats are clearly, that's their position, they're anti-crypto. Also, when that happens, because Elizabeth Warren is so influential, not only influential in shaping what the Biden administration was doing, because she was able to put a lot of her people in positions of power in the financial regulatory systems, but influential in how she's perceived in Congress. There are still a ton of lawmakers who don't understand this technology, and they're looking to the people they trust to come up with their own position. And so if you're a Democrat, for the previous Congresses, if you're a Democrat and you're looking, I don't know what to think about crypto, I trust Elizabeth Warren, I'm going to look there, and maybe that's my position now. However, I think there has been a drastic shift, and we saw it with some of the legislation that was voted on this year. I mean, the fact that we had a market structure bill go out of the House of Representatives with 70 Democrats joining almost every single Republican is really telling. I think folks are starting to understand it. They're starting to hear from their constituents on why it matters. I think that there was a legitimacy factor with the Bitcoin spot ETFs going live earlier this year, seeing names like BlackRock and Fidelity be associated with industry. And so now I think we're in a really good spot. And I was very optimistic that whether it was Harris or Trump, we were going to be in a better spot overall. I think, people have said it with Trump, there's a different level of prioritization. We don't have to guess. We know exactly what we're getting with Trump. He has been very, very vocal in his support for this industry. Harris, there was still a little more guessing, but there was all signs pointed to her also being favorable to this industry. So I think it is shifting and where it is now truly bipartisan.
Just to follow up on that, I was on Twitter about 10 minutes ago, and currently it looks like in the House we have 257 reps that are pro-crypto. In the Senate, we have 16 that are very pro-crypto, and we have a very pro-crypto cabinet in place. If you think about Vivek, RFK, obviously Trump has embraced it, and probably several others. So that's up-to-date info. We still don't know the results of the House, right? That's the last thing we need to find out, I think, before we can push through.
Yeah, and on that, now that we know we'll have a Republican Senate and a Republican in the White House, I'm curious what that means for us going forward. Like, what are the short-term changes or things that we can expect during lame duck even? Lame duck's the period between now and the end of the year, now that we know who's taking office and the end of the year, where essentially the leaving administration might try to get through some of their priorities before they leave. So curious how you guys are thinking about like what it actually means in the short term, like next 6 months, what kinds of changes do you think we'll see as a result of a changing administration and a change in the Senate?
I wouldn't be surprised if, one, I don't think you're going to see like regulation or legislation during that time period. I think that's just going to take longer. I think we'll see, unfortunately, frankly, at the SEC, I do think we're going to see a continuation of the enforcement agenda, at least through the end of Gary Gensler's tenure, whenever that may be. I don't think.
And when do we think that is?
My guess.
I'm sure everybody wants to know.
Yeah, I don't think. My guess is he leaves sometime before the inauguration, probably around the end of the year. That's traditionally what happens, and I don't I kind of don't think that he's going to want to stay and fight and try to serve under a Trump administration. So I think the first thing, right, you'll see new leadership across these regulatory agencies. I think we may also see some executive orders that hopefully give us a little bit of insight as to how this executive portion of the administration is thinking about the role of agencies that fall under its purview and the independent agencies. So, new leadership and executive orders that give us some insight.
And Cody, do you think anything gets done during lame duck?
I think lame duck possibly just got more difficult to pass legislation. If it's unified Republican control, if you're sitting there as a Republican and you're about to take power, whether it's in the Senate or the White House, I don't know if you're Donald Trump, why are you going to do anything right now when you know that starting on January 20th, you're going to have the complete gamut in front of you to do whatever you want? So I think lame duck got harder. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate with myself. If you're a Republican and you're taking unified control of government, you may be able to get a lot of concessions right now from Democrats. Stablecoin legislation being one. There are a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle who want to move stablecoin legislation. If you're a Republican, you've had several bills out there right now. You've had a bill from retiring House Financial Services Committee Chairman Patrick McHenry. You've got a bill now coming out from Senator Haggerty. And there are some partisan disagreements right now. And so if you're a Republican and you want to get this bill done, and I know McHenry does because he's leaving, you could say, hey, Democrats, this is your last shot to play ball. Because after that, we're going to go at it alone. So I'm playing devil's advocate with myself. I know that's not very clear, but I do ultimately think it's going to be difficult to get something done in lame duck.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're going to see builders come back to the U.S. All of those folks that left for Malta, Puerto Rico, even down south in Argentina, I think a lot of the builders that are at least from America, they're going to come back and they're going to build here in anticipation of having regulatory clarity.
Well, the good thing is it seems that most of you are optimistic, I think, about what happens in the next 6 to 12 months and that there should be change and more clarity and that there are things that can actually get done in Congress despite its dysfunctional nature most of the time. I know we had a very short panel, but really appreciate all four of you, joining today. And thank you guys for listening in, and hopefully this was helpful outlook for what happens next.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Zach.